Hi, everyone. Sounds okay, right? Okay, so welcome. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we have been doing and how we have been considering trust in the last couple of years. And even if you don't understand something, I'll try and stick around, please, for the rest of the presentation because it might fit in. So before I start with the future, how about we start with this morning? Who can tell me what that is? It's the English breakfast, right? So the perfect way to start the day with proper protein and fats and whatever else anyone likes in this. But it looks quite simple and we're used to it. But when you look at it a little more in depth, it's actually quite a complex thing because all of these ingredients in this breakfast come from a complex set of different supply chains. For example, this omelet, the eggs here come from a chain of different companies who have been kind of pushing this through the supply chain all the way to your plate from a certain chicken or an egg or chicken. But every other part of this one has also been processed and pushed through a certain supply chain. Ideally, we would like today to have these supply chains be very short so that we have local food that we eat, meaning that it's more fresh, that the nutrients are in higher percentage, and ideally, potentially this could also be, for example, organic eggs. But when you think about it, it actually is really hard to figure out what's going on here. When you think about, for example, your phones or your cars, as we live in an information age today, we really know everything about our phones. We know about the RAM, or at least we, the tech guys, know about the RAM. But generally, we are really well informed, and it's easy to get information on anything because you have this amazing thing in your pocket, which goes and talks to Google and literally give you any sort of piece of information that you would like, which is almost in real time. But when it comes to your breakfast, how do you really know that this egg is organic? Actually, it turns out it's a very big problem because of the complexity and the opacities of supply chains. And by a study in 2017, it has been found out that actually 32% of the manufacturers cannot certify and say that their food is not fraudulent, that the ingredients they use are proper. This is not only happening in the food industry, by the way. There have been reports recently that even the US Army has fraudulent parts in their airplanes and missiles, so that's kind of a nice thing to think about. But anyway, coming back to food, and why I'm going from food is that we've been in this business for over 5 years. So the last 5 years, we've been actually building systems that are enabling customers, but also anyone within the supply chain to actually see what's going on and where their eggs and omelets are coming from. So this is actually OriginTrail 1.0, where we haven't been using blockchain at the time, and you can still actually download the apps that we've been making, which are part of the system. Essentially, what we did is we enabled anyone who was a shopper to scan a barcode that's already on the product and enter the expiry date or an LOT number, which is enough to identify a certain batch of products. For example, for this milk, I'm not sure if the video will work, but
V življenju je vredno pustiti sledi.
Sledite našim izdelkom z brezplačno aplikacijo Izvor. Poskenirajte črtno kodo, preberite več informacij o izdelku in odkrite, s katerih slovenskih kmetij izvira. Več na spletni strani Mlečna cesta, Zelene doline.
So this was a nationwide campaign in Slovenia, obviously, showcasing how our app works, and essentially for all of the products of this producer, Zelene doline is their brand. You can actually see where exactly the milk comes from in any sort of cheese or yogurt they make. And this is changing on a daily basis because they source from local dairy farms, and it can be up to a couple of hundred farms that give milk for the yogurt that you have on your table every single day. So it's really hard to figure out what's going on in these supply chains because there's no really good way to track them all together. And this was quite successful. We actually got quite a few companies on board, especially in Slovenia. We got actually companies from very, very different verticals from beef, poultry meat, dairy products, vegetables, wine as well. But then again, we kept getting a very simple question. That is, how can anyone trust the information our systems are providing them? And that's a totally valid question, because in a way we were this intermediary between companies that was getting this data from all their systems. And this is all, by the way, automatic. So basically, every night, whatever data they have on what they're producing that day gets automatically input into our system. Our system crunches it in a way and then allows everyone to check it. But then again, us as a small startup at the time, it makes sense to ask a question: how can someone trust us? What if we make a bad system? What if the system doesn't perform well? Or what if there's a scandal, and there's a lot of these food scandals going on, and we get pressured into changing the data to save face of a company that's in our system? And I'm not sure how familiar you are with the problems, but for example, in China, where we are very present over the last couple of years, I'll talk a bit more about that later. There's quite a lot of food scandals and actually problems where people, actually babies, have died. About 10 years ago from milk. There's a problem with, I think, something called gutter oil, and I will leave you with that to figure out what it is. But anyways, it's a very, very painful problem, and luckily in Europe we have less of these, but that doesn't mean we don't have them. So how did we answer to this question? For a while we didn't have an answer, but then we realized we needed to look deeper into the technology, and blockchain came as a logical answer. But before I kind of touch upon blockchain, I just want to explain very simply why blockchain and why not blockchain. So essentially, when it comes to the data, there's two really kind of ways we can look at record keeping today. So you can have some sort of a centralized ledger, a list, and kind of the easiest example to understand here are banks. So imagine a bank is really someone who manages the relations in a network of people. So they have information on all of our accounts, all our personal information. They know if I sent a transaction to any one of you, they keep track of this, and we trust them that they're going to keep our funds there and that they're going to do a good job. Basically, this hasn't been a big problem so far until you have a big inflation like we observe now in Venezuela, or we had here in Serbia before, where actually the bank is allowed to manipulate the ledger, to add more, to print more money, or just block someone's account. But what is characteristic for centralized ledgers is that basically there's one central authority that takes care of this ledger. That also means that they can change it. And finally, depending on the system, it can also be a single point of failure, meaning if a bomb destroys the bank systems, the systems are gone, at least theoretically. On the other hand, when you look at the decentralized ledgers, it's a completely different system. There's no central authority in there. Everyone keeps a copy of the ledger, of the same ledger, and everyone is responsible for updating their own copy. And essentially, blockchain is a decentralized ledger. It presents a system where there's no single player that can influence the other players in the way that they want. So you can literally trust into the mechanisms of the actual network, meaning the protocols that underpin it, which finally are underpinned by math, cryptography, and computer science. So essentially today, if you use one of the best blockchain networks like Bitcoin or Ethereum, you can be completely sure that your transaction is going to go through because the network is decentralized and no one is going to be able to block it. And this is actually quite revolutionary. Though on the other hand, blockchain really just brings trust minimization. There's a lot of noise around, especially now, where people claim that blockchain can solve everything. So even in industry where it's totally inapplicable, people try to put it somehow. And it's a totally different topic, so I don't want to go really there, but I want to explain what blockchain is not. So blockchain, in a way, helps you have this list all over the place, right? And because you have a list, everyone is incentivized to take care of this list. So I don't want to change my own list because I won't have the proper state of what else all of you have. because that is the, for example, state of accounts or the money that we have on our accounts. And if I, for example, add a little bit to my own account, you guys won't update your lists because it doesn't work that way. It's not in your interest, right? Why would you give me extra Bitcoin for no reason? And because of this distrust and this kind of everyone is an enemy mentality in Bitcoin, it is one of the most, if not the most trusted network ever built in the world. For the last 9 years, it hasn't been attacked once, or at least it hasn't been brought down once. There have been some sort of weird, interesting attacks. But anyways, what it really does is it allows and empowers everyone to trust their own list and to trust the mechanism of exchanging information between lists. What it doesn't do some things well at all. For example, when we wanted to solve our problem, which was, again, how do people trust the data that we've been getting from companies? Our idea was, okay, let's put it on the blockchain. Simple. It's immutable. The data cannot be changed, and it's trustworthy. So as soon as we tried to do it, we realized that we hit a wall because blockchain is super expensive. If you want to store 1 kilobyte of data on Ethereum at this moment, it costs hundreds of dollars, even $1,000, depending on the price of Ethereum. So that's no way sustainable because companies and supply chains have way more than 1 kilobyte of data, especially on a daily basis. And on the other hand, what it also doesn't do well, it's really slow. But that is the trade-off because everyone has keeping this huge list, which is actually hundreds of gigabytes big. It has to have some sort of trade-off, and it's really speed and cost. So we realized quickly that we cannot actually do this with blockchain. So we needed some other system, and we set our path to actually build this system because we knew the problem really well, and that's why we actually set out to build OriginTrail, the protocol. And to explain why and what OriginTrail protocol brings, really briefly on a slide, is back to that supply chain problem. So you have a bunch of companies that actually very rarely are a chain. They're actually a network of different companies, and they all share both products, ingredients, and a lot of different services. But in the end, they have trouble sharing data. All of these companies have a certain data silo. It's a system. Imagine the world of computers before internet. You could do things, but you could not really go to the internet. So that's kind of the state of supply chain industry at the moment. It's a very, I would say, old industry. So in that sense, it didn't progress in digitalization as much as other industries. So in supply chain, there's one good thing though, and that is each company knows who their supplier is and who their customers are. So in that sense, they can validate some information between each other. Because when you look at blockchain, it's great that you can put data on the blockchain and it's immutable. But how about putting some garbage data on the blockchain? It's just a bunch of immutable garbage, right? So it doesn't really solve the problem if these eggs are organic, because I can claim they're organic, I put it up on the blockchain, it's immutable, super, it doesn't work. In that way, you need something that's a little more sophisticated. It's actually allowing different players in the supply chain to publish all the information they have on what has been going on within their domain of the supply chain. And if this data matches, and if there's a system that can do it, you can be much more certain that this data is valid. And that's why we have built something called the consensus check, where basically we have sets from data sets from different companies that once you introduce them into the network, they get automatically connected and checked if they match. For example, if the codes on the product match, if all the information on the batch level matches, and everything that's possible to collect. So this is something we've been building for supply chains, but essentially it is very generic. So imagine how do you validate some certain piece of information? So you really look at the source, right? Trust has two enemies. Trust has enemy of bad character and bad data. And if you look at media can be trustworthy or not, or they can have bad data or not. And in that sense, to eliminate these problems, one needs to build a generic system that allows for different parties, be that people or machines or whatever else, to be able to agree on something. So if we all can agree today that it's still it's daylight outside, right? That's a very not so valuable information for us, but it's very easy to agree upon this. But when you have a situation like a supply chain, it's not so easy because data is very fragmented. And in order to know that the eggs are really organic, you need to get this data in one place and actually match it together. And the more information you get using different technologies, in that sense, the better. So we've been actually doing this quite a lot over the last couple of years. And one of the most interesting projects is what we've been doing in China with the Yimishiji online marketplace, which is a farm-to-fork, innovative, the first of its kind marketplace in China, where for each of the products that they have and sell in Shanghai, they actually have a fully transparent supply chain. So they have implemented OriginTrail actually since last year. And this is Matilda Ho, who's also, by the way, a TED speaker, as the founder of Yimishiji, as well as the Bits and Bytes VC arm of their company. So essentially, these things are already getting there. That's the near future. And even though it's still very nascent, the technology is in its early stages. It's there to come. And I want to just put this in a bit of a perspective in terms of general technology development. So when you look at the first computers, which were there in like late 40s, and the dawn on the internet, which was a couple of decades later, we had exponential growth, really. So at a certain point, it didn't make sense to a lot of people that people should have PCs. Like they thought computers should be for big, companies, and that's it. And all of a sudden, we had the PC revolution, and we had some sort of a first internet, which was very static. People were not really actually collaborating that much. It was more about some static data on a website and people consuming this data. But then we got to Web 2, and Web 2 is really what we have today, which is really a system where we actually share constantly. So we're interconnected, and we cannot imagine a different internet, right? Together with mobile and these technologies converging, we got a completely new world in the last 20 years with all the business models like Uber and other ones that were mentioned already. So we're going towards something that's called Web 3.0. And Web 3.0 is actually the new state of the internet where we want to build a layer on top of Web 2.0 that actually has trust embedded in the system. So in that sense, I'm over time, sorry. In that sense, we are building systems that are going to be allowing everyone to check the validity of information, be it with blockchain or some other system, directly through very specific mathematical models. What this will mean, I will finish in 2 sentences, I promise. When it comes to the new intertwining of technologies, when we look at AI, which is progressing at a fast pace, when we look at brain-machine interfaces and cybernetics in general, where we are already cyborgs interacting with Google constantly and feeding it knowledge, when we have people like Elon Musk and other thought leaders actually afraid of AI, trust is going to be something very important. Because if one day I'm going to have a chip in my head that is going to be able to influence my behavior, I really, really want to know that I can trust what it does to my brain. That's it for me. Thank you, guys.